Hi, it's Craig here. It's Tuesday the 17th of March 2020 in the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic. Time will tell with regards to what's happening, but this has nothing to do with that, except that I am bunkered down here in self-isolation, but it's otherwise just an opportunity to wrap up the video series that I started 2 years ago, called Writing My Unfinished Novel Every Day, to say that the novel's finished. It's not untitled anymore. It's got a title, it's got a physical form, and it's real and it's done, which is quite exciting. And a really nice thing to have finished after starting it. And I mean, I really haven't given much thought to what I was going to say here, except that I knew that it was time for me to feel a bit of closure by recording this and noting that it's finished. But it's funny, thinking back to when I first started this project, I knew I wanted to write something. I knew that I'd tried many years ago to write things that I was never happy with. So this was my first real attempt at writing a proper novel in a proper systematic way, with a really finely tuned focus on plot and world building and character and intention, wanting it to be a really good piece of work. And it started out with not much of an idea, just a little bit of a thought as to what it could have been, and I worked on that for a year. Really about a year before I started to think that the idea was not enough to hold everything that I wanted it to be. And then I came up with all sorts of other considerations around what I thought the book could be, which, like an accordion, expanded and contracted into different versions, until I settled upon what the book's turned into, which really came about because of a couple of different things. One, like I've just mentioned, I thought that the original premise of the book that I came up with at the very start of the writing project was too light and flimsy to be the sort of serious literature project that I wanted this book ultimately to reflect. I wanted it to be something that held for me the same sort of gravity that I get out of Samuel Beckett, the prose and sense of intellectual rigour, I guess, that I get from Pynchon and some of those authors. But it wasn't until I had those feelings of flimsiness that I then discovered a few different authors. I think in a very particular period of time, I came across Thomas Bernhard through W.G. Sebald, and I mean, my relationship with Sebald had gone back years since I read The Rings of Saturn, but I didn't understand the historical context that Sebald came out of, particularly with following on from Thomas Bernhard. In reading Bernhard, reading Wittgenstein's Nephew in particular, gave me a real sense of that sense of autobiography, and fantasy is not necessarily the right word, but that sort of exploration of the fictions that come out of the stories that we tell ourselves and that we then pass on to others. And I also came across the works of Gerald Manane at that time, Border Districts and The planes, and which I really loved those works, and again the sense of autobiographical infusion that fiction contained, and so that really informed the way that I was going to take what I came to increasingly think of as a fairly light, flimsy plot that I'd initially come up with, and turned it into something that would contain a lot more personal gravity, a lot more weight from, maybe the opportunity to infuse some more philosophical reflections on things that I otherwise found it hard to know how to make that a part of the initial story. But it still contains the plot of the initial story, embedded in this sort of meta reflective narrative or whatever it is. And it's a book that I never knew that this is what it was going to be, but I'm really happy with the way that it's turned out. In one way, it feels like the culmination of previous ideas that I'd had about writing and things I tried to do many years ago. This is the best version of all of those things. And the final version, really, whatever I write next, will not tread it in the same space that this book has. It really is it feels to me like it's the culmination of years of different threads of thought, different attempts at prose, and it's a really nice, part of me feels like if I had have been able to write this when I was 20, to cap off my teenage years, that would have been really nice. But then there's so much in the book that's all about being 30, being in mid-30s, about having a child and family, and it's looking back at that period, of being early 20s, late teens, with nostalgia, which is not a nostalgia that could have existed if I had written it at the time. And I just didn't have the thoughts at the time, so that's a pretty silly thing to say, that I would have liked to have written it back then. It's a book of me now, in its own way. But what I'm trying to say is I'm happy to draw a line there, to have it be what it is, and then I'm really interested in doing something else going forward. I've got a few ideas in mind, not necessarily straight up fiction at this point. I've got at least one significant essay that I'd like to write. I'm really interested in doing some poetry or prose poetry work, which I've been reading quite a lot of lately, and then looking at what another novel could be. I'm really happy with what I've written. I think it's the best that I could have created while working a full-time job and the busyness of life and all the rest. It's something that, that's a funny thing to say. That's almost a cop-out, saying, well, it's the best that I could do under the constraints of a busy life. And that is true, but it's also very difficult to know what the alternative could have been, because you can have all the time in the world and not do anything. I'm often most productive when I've got a lot of constraints around me that push down and create a pressure that then turns the coal into the diamond, or the sand into the glass, or whatever else is made under pressure and heat. And so maybe this is just the best that I could have done under any circumstance. On a sentence-to-sentence level, I really like the book. The sentences are something that I think others would have a real challenge with, and some feedback I've had from those who've read the book has been about the frustratingly long sentences with no commas, which is not for any other reason than that I just think they're very pretty, and has a jazz lyrical nature to it. I mean, there's a sentence in here that goes for a page and a half, and I just love it. Let me see if I can find it. It's about a pub down the road. Which I'll read, if that's okay, with the camera. But it was also the kind of pub that had the best bands and a really interesting mix of people, from the arts students who walked down from Islington, who I can see tonight, such as these couple of poet dudes with their long hair and thin arms wrapped around their noise musician girlfriends with piercings all over and an absence of any underwear. And then you have the big guys in from the wharf who've docked at the Carrington coal loader, and they might just be in from Singapore or from China, and they are of every nationality you can think of, with tattoos on their forearms, their thighs, and faces that to my eyes always demand to be read in combination of each other, like hieroglyphics on a wall. But because the sailors keep moving around, they tell a story without a definite beginning or conclusion, and because of this, the content contained within their ink tells something utterly true about the narrative data running beneath the skin of the world. And then on past these sailors, you have the taxi drivers hanging around the front doors, smoking and waiting for the next shift to start. And while they were very rarely involved in fist fights, I have seen more than a few of them throw a glass into the pub like a hand grenade that started many of the worst brawls that they would then stand and laugh about from the sidelines. And of course, it would be remiss to not mention the peculiar family-friendly vibe injected by a few of the patrons, as you have locals in pressed suits and married couples in groups wearing organic shirts and pants, abiding that tightrope aesthetic of free-thinking progressives and the mortgages they churn butter for every day. And just to wrap up the scene, I would also make mention of the university students in polo shirts and thongs playing complicated board games near the music stage, and the electronic / country / dub reggae fusion band setting up near them, and the bar staff who are absolute athletes in the manner they're able to move around the bar and dive between each other's legs in order to get past with a glass of bourbon and a packet of nuts. Not to say anything here about the long-term residents who live above the bar area, who are a whole story all of themselves. And while I have only been 18 for a few months, and hence have only been coming to places like this for a short while, I can honestly say that, sure, of course, absolutely, it's true, I have only just met this girl and am only just starting to get a read on her, but I can think of no other place in the world that will make more of an impression of the kind I'm trying to make in terms of a heightened sense of stimulation and fascination, and why not once more call it what it is, which is a certain sense of danger that can only be forged here at the Watt Hotel. So something like that, to me, that's the sort of thing that I want to feel in music, and in, again, Pynchon's sort of Gravity's Rainbow sentences that just aren't long and winding for the sake of it, but you think, I want to contain enough colour in there and enough movement and enough variety of word that makes a really stimulating effect. And that's not every sentence. There's a lot of very short ones in there too, but I've always wanted to have a very particular voice with writing, the same sort of voice that Beckett has. I think it's completely Beckett's thing to hear him write in a certain way. Thomas Bernhard, it's certainly that same thing. And authors that don't have a certain voice, I don't find as interesting. Faulkner, very strong voice. And so that's, for me, this is my voice. This is the way that I love to think and talk and waffle that sort of colour. And so I'm very, very, very pleased with what I was able to do with the writing, with the plot, with the whole book. I'm not embarrassed about it, which I have been very embarrassed about other things that I've written in the past, and think I don't want to show this to anybody. But this I've sent out to publishing houses. I've given a few copies out. I'm actually thinking about whether I might record even like a podcast version of the book if it doesn't get picked up by anyone who wants to publish it. I'd like to do an audio version. I think it actually reads well as an audio version, particularly with me reading it and getting a sense of the sentences and the sound. So I think I'll leave it there. I won't turn this into too much of a big thing, but I just wanted to put a cap on that and say the book is done. And recording these videos daily early on was absolutely critical to the success of me pushing on through those early days to make it happen. In the last period of writing the book, I didn't do the daily vlogs, or weekly or monthly. I just got into the space of writing whenever I could, whether it be night time, early morning, little patches of time. I just drilled and drilled into writing, and then I had a few months gap after finishing the writing component, and then I edited the book, and I did 2 or 3 rounds of line by line, word by word editing, until I got to the point where I thought this is finished, which is where it's at now. So that's it. We'll see what happens from here. Thanks for following if you have, which I have, because I'm the one doing it. So that's the most important thing. All right, see you later.